I got an interesting email from Barry about a radio that he replaced the caps in, and he had on the Variac, and he was turning up the voltage on the radio, and it does play, but he noticed that the dial lamps are way too bright, and he's afraid that they're going to burn out. Now, he had a .16 amp lamps in there, and the circuit requires .15, and that should be okay. That's pretty close. So let's take a look at the filament string of this radio. This is part of the wiring diagram, the radio that Barry's working on. It's a Zenith 6D029, and if we start all the way over at the left at the plug, the current comes in, goes up, then goes all the way over and down to the filament string, goes through all the filaments, and then over to the 35Z5, then through that filament, and then down and over to the source again, completing the circuit. Now, the 35Z5 has a center tap, and as we see here, that center tap is connected and goes through both of the dial lamps, and if you look closely, those dial lamps are actually in parallel across the second half of the filament of the 35Z5. Let's take a closer look at that 35Z5. Here you can see the center tap and how the pins count. This view is from the bottom. In other words, the chassis is upside down and we're looking at the bottom of the tube. In the upper right, it says NC. It stands for not connected. That's pin 1. Then we have pin 2, pin 3. We don't have a pin 4, but we still count that space. Pin 5. We don't have pin 6, but we still count it. Pin 7 and pin 8. Let's take a look at pins 2 and 3 of the 35Z5. That is the right half of the filament of the 35Z5, and if you follow those wires from pin 2 and 3 over to the dial lamps, you'll see that both of the dial lamps are in parallel across pins 2 and 3. Now, the problem that Barry has is the filament of the 35Z5 is open between pins 2 and 3 inside the 35Z5. So with that portion of the filament burned out, what happens is all the current goes through the dial lamps back to the source, and that's why the dial lamps are too bright, and chances are the filaments are maybe a little bit weak, but chances are those dial lamps will burn out. So I emailed Barry and asked him to check the filament on the 35Z5 with an ohm meter. I've had this problem several times myself, so it's not uncommon for this to happen.